Now, in news breaking overnight, British school leavers are to be offered a taste of military life without long-term commitment with a new Armed Forces gap year scheme. The course is aimed at under-25s, with the government introducing the scheme to help tackle the military's long-term recruitment and retention struggles. It comes as the future of European security is on the brink, with Zelensky flying to North America as we speak to finalise a deal with Donald Trump that could end the war with Russia. And Europe and Britain are finally getting real about defence and security, with a lot of talk about spending commitments and rearming. But for all its global strategic ambitions, the United Kingdom is in a particularly perilous state. The army has reduced in size by at least 34,700 personnel since 2010, leaving it at its smallest size since the Napoleonic Wars. Since the turn of the millennium, the Royal Navy has shrunk by 40%. HMS Ambush, one of the Navy's attack submarines, has not been out of port for over 3 years and 4 months. It won't be taking part in any ambushes anytime soon. In December, there was not a single Royal Navy attack submarine at sea. Put bluntly, we are not ready for war, and we need a lot more than some gap year tryouts to set that right. But what would we be defending with a renewed military? Now, defence and spy chiefs have recently been sabre-rattling on Russia, but increasingly it feels like our main threats are not external but internal. Will more tanks aid us in the fight against the rising tide of parallel societies and the collapse of free speech and our liberties? Will new infantry regiments help our battle against an economy that has barely produced any growth in 2 decades? And why should we bother building new submarines if we can't even defend our channel against mass immigration and a porous and broken border? Well, the US national security strategy has warned that our continent, Europe, is struggling with political liberty and sovereignty, migration policies that are transforming and creating strife, the censorship of free speech and suppression of political opposition, cratering birth rates and loss of national identities and self-confidence. You know, I think they've got a point. If we want to inspire our young people from all backgrounds to step up and defend Britain, then let's give them something to fight for.
Hello, I'm Bev Turner. Now, it can feel like the money in our bank accounts at the moment does not keep up with the cost of living, and maybe there's a solution. I'm here today with the CEO of TallyMoney, Cameron Parry. Cameron, what is TallyMoney?
Well, Bev, with TallyMoney, you get a current account and a debit card, but instead of pounds, you use milligrams of gold as your everyday money.
So why gold?
Gold traditionally is a great store of value. It has, on average, gone up at over 11% per annum for the last 25 years against the pound. It's tripled in value in the last decade. And in the last 2 years alone, it's increased by 50% against the pound. Banks' savings products just can't compete with that level of growth.
But this isn't just about gold. This is about a currency that you guys have created at TallyMoney. Explain it to me as though I'm an idiot.
So, look, people need to be able to hold their earnings and build their savings in a money that retains its value and remains in their legal control and remains theirs to access, away from government control.
Great. You had me at not exposed to government control.
You should feel safe and happy with your money. You should have peace of mind. The more money you see in your bank balance, and that's the type of thing we're trying to deliver, and give people choice in the type of money they get to use every day.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Cameron. Thank you.
Well, joining me now is the Under-Secretary of State for Public Diplomacy at the US government, Sarah B. Rogers. Sarah, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon, and Merry Christmas. I believe you're spending time with your family in South Carolina, so thank you for taking the time to be with us today. I just want to start with this proposed peace deal. Zelensky's on the way to meet the head of your government right now in Florida. How do you respond to those critics who say that the US administration has been rather too close to the Kremlin in these deliberations?
So, one of my sharpest surprises stepping into public life is that people will accuse you of being pro Russia for basically any reason or no reason. What our national security strategy says with respect to Russia is that we desire strategic stability. That means no ongoing conflict, no imminent risk of one. Frankly, you should want that with any country, even countries you disagree with. Contrast the warm language about centuries-long alliances and shared values that we use with respect to Western Europe. And Charlie, that's why we express the concerns and the hopes that we do in our NSS about Europe and the recovery of European civilization, which you referenced just moments ago.
Now, Sarah, obviously in that national security strategy, lots of reference to free speech. You've recently announced a series of sanctions on some British and European citizens, some of whom who are in the United States, on free speech grounds. And I know you can't comment on sort of ongoing litigation there, but there has been a reaction to that. Emmanuel Macron called it intimidation and coercion, aimed at undermining European digital sovereignty. What is your reaction to the French leader?
So, Charlie, the individuals on this list, and it's a short list, are individuals who in most cases took government money, sometimes American government money, sometimes foreign government money, to attack and destroy American businesses with the goal of suppressing American political speech. And sanctions are one of the tools in our toolkit to respond, where they're not the only tool that we've employed. But freedom of expression is one of the crown jewels of American law and our way of life. It has helped make our country safe, strong, and prosperous, including by allowing us to have honest debates about issues like mass migration that Britain is struggling with now. So these were defensive measures, and I hope that they will be the beginning of a conversation and not the end of one. But if you were to show up at an American port of entry and say, my goal visiting the United States is to destroy an American company, and by the way, to eviscerate the American First Amendment, America would be well within its rights to say, we choose not to welcome you as a guest. And that's what these sanctions do.
So you say it's a defensive sanction, but it clearly has some offensive overtures as well. This is about America seeking to influence the world, which the Trump administration has come into a lot of criticism for, that it's not necessarily promoting American ideals overseas. You're doing these sanctions to defend American free speech, but also you want to change the free speech position in Europe as well, surely.
Well, to be clear, what these sanctions consist of are travel bans. So there are some kinds of sanctions, and that word covers a broad spectrum of measures where we would do things like lock a person out of the global financial system. The European Union has done that, by the way, levied those kinds of banking sanctions in response to political speech it dislikes. These sanctions just say you can't come to the United States. Now, it's true, and we make no secret of the fact that we hope to influence global debate and discussion, particularly in allied countries, about core American interests and values like freedom of expression. But what we've decreed here is that if your purpose is to destroy American businesses and censor American speech, you are just not a guest we choose to invite onto American soil.
Now, your Vice President, J.D. Vance, he's spoken previously, jokingly at least, partly perhaps, about Britain being an Islamist country. Your national security strategy talks a lot about NATO members become majority non-European, lots of discussion about migration and its risks and threats to Europe. But at the top of this hour, I was speaking about perhaps most threats to Europe being internal rather than external. Do you share that perspective?
I think, Charlie, you made a really poignant point when you talked about the emergence of parallel societies in Britain. So I'm not a Brit, but I can relay what I observe when I interact with your media and with Brits on the ground. I can observe that your NHS has endorsed incestuous cousin marriage on the ground that migrants do it. I can observe that the British Medical Journal recently published a defense of female genital mutilation, something we never thought we'd see in any civilized country. And when we talk about civilization, we are invoking ties deeper and broader than we'd share with members of the same state or members of the same nation. When we talk about shared civilization, we are talking about the free world in the United States, in Britain, in Europe, that came together to beat Hitler, than beat communism. We are talking about the kind of society where contracts are enforced fairly, where half the population aren't veiled or mutilated, and where Charlie Kirk and Charlie Hebdo are both allowed to speak. I think you're right that there's a parallel part of British society that still wants to live in that kind of world. And you need to make a choice about whether you're going to allow two-tier policing, two-tier court systems, two-tier views of whether women are persons or not. And I think civilizational self-confidence, which we espouse in our national security strategy, means choosing to be the kind of civilization Britain historically was, and I think could be again.
Now, Sarah, in reaction to your national security strategy, in particular reference to threats that you described around mass immigration, some reporters said that it was pushing the racist Great Replacement conspiracy theory. What do you make of that charge, which was very widespread in the coverage of that strategy and its description of European mass migration?
I mean, look, people openly pushing mass migration for over a decade openly crowed and boasted that migration was changing public opinion, it was changing the composition of the population, that there would be more voters inclined a certain way. And I think actually electoral trends have complicated that view because we saw a surge of support among Black and Latino voters for President Trump in the last election. But nonetheless, the same advocates of mass migration who rely on mass migration to change the composition of the electorate then call you a conspiracy theorist if you express any concern about that. Charlie, I think it's common sense that when you change the people who live in the country's values change too. And I think our national security strategy acknowledges that, and you don't have to agree with us on it. But Brits should at least be able to have that conversation without being banned from the internet or dragged out of the airport under a terrorism law, which has happened, or dragged out of the bath under a public order law, which has happened to Brits, or sentenced to jail for voicing common sense arguments about issues like DEI. That's also happened to Brits.
OK, Under-Secretary of State for Public Diplomacy, Sarah Rogers, thank you very much for your time here on GB News. Right, I'm joined now by the Deputy Editor for The Spectator, Freddie Gray, for his reaction to that. Freddie, let's start at the top, because it seemed that Sarah Rogers was pushing back very strongly at the idea that the US brokered peace deal is closer to the Kremlin than it is to Kiev. But when you speak to most commentators, they certainly share that view.
I think that's what the most pundits think. I think what's clear is that the White House feels it has made more progress with Russia than it does with Ukraine. It finds Ukraine very frustrating to deal with. Certainly senior leadership in the White House, from the president down, finds Zelensky a frustrating figure to negotiate with. And it's interesting already in this latest possibility of peace. This is coming from the Ukrainian side. The Americans are not sounding quite so enthusiastic about it, probably because they can see what most people can see, which is that Russia are not going to agree to these 20 points, the 20 points that Ukraine seems to be laying out. And one of the key sticking points is territory. Obviously, that is open for negotiation, it seems. But the other big point that Ukraine won't budge on, and Russia doesn't seem willing to budge on, is Ukraine's military. I think Ukraine are insisting on having a force of 800,000, I believe. And that is something Russia deems unacceptable. Russia will also deem it unacceptable that Ukraine is not part of NATO, but has Article 5 protection. Therefore, if Russia incurs on what's deemed to be Ukrainian territory in the future, Article 5 could be triggered and all the NATO countries would be at war with Russia. That is also unacceptable to Russia. So I think the reason Americans rankle at this idea that they are closer to Russia is that they feel that Russia is a negotiating partner they are having talks with, and they're talking about the future. There's all these big business plans lined up between sort of powerful American entities and businesses and Russian businesses and so on, and they're getting quite excited at that prospect. And then they see Ukraine as just obstinately refusing to budge. And they're not very sympathetic, I think it's fair to say, towards the Ukrainian side. And that is where Europeans disagree with America. Yes, be interesting to see how those elements are ironed out in the coming days, or indeed if they are at all. But Freddie, referring to the rest of the interview that Sarah Rogers gave us, some of the most fighting talk I've heard from an American official publicly
about the state of Europe, talking about free speech, people being dragged from baths for expressing a view on mass immigration, taking aim at mass immigration itself as well. Sarah Rogers there, even referring to an article being published in defence of female genital mutilation in Britain and talking about parallel societies. It does feel sometimes, doesn't it, that the US is sort of attacking the failures of European policymaking and sort of outlining areas where we've gone wrong over recent years?
Well, it does feel like, I thought it was a fascinating interview, by the way. Congratulations to you for getting it. I mean, it is that's exactly the dynamic, isn't it? We have a lot of Brits who feel that what the Americans are saying is true, because it is true. We do have free speech problems in this country. We do have mass migration problems in this country, and we aren't allowed to talk about it very often. And that is something that J.D. Vance in particular, as you mentioned, is taking very seriously. It's something the State Department is taking seriously, and it's something the National Security Team in America are taking seriously. And it's interesting dynamic because you have British leadership just sort of, guffawing. And every time Trump has mentioned it to Keir Starmer says, we have a very proud tradition of free speech in our country, and we will do for a long time to come, as though sort of, who are you to, sort of polite way of saying, don't lecture us about free speech. But these are not fake concerns. These are real concerns. People are being arrested for what they post on social media. People are going to prison for opinions. And that is not something this Trump administration wants to see. And I, for one, as a Brit, am very pleased that they are pushing Britain on this. And I hope they push a bit harder.
Yeah, certainly drawing a spotlight to that. Thank you very much, Deputy Editor for The Spectator, Freddie Gray. Thank you for your time this afternoon.